Welcome to our channel. In today's video, we're diving into a gripping story that explores the unraveling of a once happy marriage, torn apart by secrets, betrayal, and a quest for revenge. Follow Caleb Walker, a man who finds himself caught in a web of mystery after his wife, Savannah, returns from a research trip with a dark and twisted secret. As the tension builds, Caleb is forced to confront the unimaginable, leading him down a path of vengeance that will change his life forever. Stay tuned as we unfold this intense and emotional journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest stories. I keep finding myself thinking about a time when things were easier, back when Savannah and I were full of hopes and dreams. We'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee, talking about the future. We were young, driven, and always made time for each other, even with our hectic schedules. But over time, our careers took over, and we drifted apart. We just kept our heads down, focusing on the next promotion, the next deadline, until that distance between us became impossible to ignore. Now it feels like we're living in separate worlds, barely able to connect. The unease I've been feeling lately just won't go away. Savannah spent months doing fieldwork in a remote Appalachian community, totally absorbed in her PhD research. Since she got back, it's like she's been consumed by her thesis, holed up in her study, leaving our house quiet and empty. I'm left alone at my desk, wrestling with the growing gulf between us. It's like Savannah's shutting down any attempt I make to talk about it, and I'm running out of ways to reach her. Let me tell you a little about us. My name's Caleb Walker. I'm a construction engineer. I'm good at what I do, and got recruited straight out of grad school. Savannah, my wife, is a real academic, passionate about research and teaching. We met in college in Colorado, got hitched 5 years ago, both went for our master's degrees, hers in sociology, mine in engineering. Despite our different paths, we've always supported each other. But lately, everything's changed. Savannah's research trip to Appalachia stretched into 6 long months, way longer than we planned. She barely kept in touch, claiming there was no phone or internet access, which seemed hard to believe. When she finally came home, she locked herself away in the study, saying she needed to concentrate on her thesis. Communication between us dwindled to almost nothing. I've tried to get through to her, but she keeps pushing me away, focusing on her research into a secretive Pentecostal splinter group. I get that her work is important, but the way she's going about it is driving us further apart. I can't help but wonder about that community she studied. How did Savannah, an outsider, manage to gain their trust, especially for that long? Did they make an exception for her? Did they even know she was studying them? These questions ate at me, but Savannah refused to discuss anything about her research. She wouldn't talk about her time there, not a word. Before she left, she'd shared her research plan with me, but now that she was back, it was like she'd clammed up completely. I felt shut out of a huge part of her life. Simple, harmless questions seemed to set her off. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like Savannah was hiding something big. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife, and she just retreated further into herself. She promised to explain everything once her thesis was finished, but that wasn't good enough for me. Why wouldn't she just tell me now? The first thing I noticed when she got back was how different she looked. Before, she dressed like any other 26-year-old woman, stylish but not too flashy. Now, she was wearing these long, conservative dresses that covered her neck and ankles. She stopped wearing makeup and perfume. Her hair, which used to be so beautiful, was pulled back in a tight bun. When I mentioned her new look, she just shrugged it off, saying she liked the conservative style and that it helped her stay focused on her research. At night, it was the same story. Plain nightgowns and no affection, claiming it would mess with her emotions and her research. No matter how hard I tried, she kept her distance, more wrapped up in her thesis than our marriage. Our house didn't feel like home anymore. On top of everything else, Savannah had picked up some kind of stomach bug on her trip. She was always nauseous, but she refused to see a doctor, kept saying she was feeling better. Then there was her sudden, almost frantic, push to finish her thesis. It made no sense. She still had 2 years to go. When I asked her about it, she said she wanted to go back to teaching high school in the fall and needed her degree by then. It sounded plausible, but it didn't sit right with me. We always talked about major decisions together, but now she was going solo, which put even more strain on our marriage. I asked her where she was applying for teaching jobs, but she said she hadn't gotten around to it, too busy to even think about it. I offered to help, but she shut me down, told me not to interfere, that she had it handled. Savannah's focus on her thesis and getting that degree seemed to eclipse everything else, including our relationship. I felt totally shut out of her decisions, and what worried me most was that she didn't seem to see how connected we were. Her choices impacted me, too, but I didn't have a say in any of it. As time went by, our conversations stayed superficial. Even though her health improved, our marriage kept falling apart. I buried myself in my work, but Savannah still wouldn't discuss any plans for the future, which meant I couldn't even coordinate my upcoming work trips with her. Our life together was unraveling. I tried to be careful around her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the outside looking in. My anxiety went through the roof, and started manifesting physically. I crave structure. I can't stand surprises, and Savannah was turning my life into a chaotic mess. I started to fear she was choosing her academic pursuits over me, and it was eating me alive. The thought that she might be choosing her studies over me was terrifying, and it left me feeling utterly defeated. In the evenings, I'd try to get her talking, asking about how things were going, but if I dared to ask about her living arrangements during the research, she'd get all defensive and angry. She just kept repeating that she wouldn't discuss anything until her thesis was done, which only made me more suspicious and frustrated. Our once loving marriage was crumbling right in front of my eyes. We hadn't been intimate since before either of us left for our trips. Savannah claimed that physical contact would somehow contaminate her research, which made me wonder what the hell she'd gotten herself into. How could being with her own husband mess with her research? What exactly had she been doing out there? I started to question whether she'd broken her vows. Her refusal to talk about any of it only made things worse. She moved my workspace into the dining room and started keeping the den door locked. When I finally asked her straight up if she'd been unfaithful, she blew up, insisting she wouldn't discuss her research until her dissertation was complete. It was painfully clear that our marriage was on life support. My stomach was constantly in knots, and I dreaded coming home. It felt like Savannah wasn't mine anymore, that she was completely consumed by this degree. Our once happy marriage was slipping away, and I couldn't help but wonder if other couples went through this when one person was so focused on their thesis. The crazy deadlines she'd set for herself only made everything harder. After one particularly nasty fight, I finally snapped. "Savannah," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You've destroyed our trust. I think our marriage is over, and it's your fault." I unleashed a torrent of criticism, then stormed out and drove for hours, just trying to calm down. As I drove, I tried to make sense of everything. Savannah had said she still loved me, and hoped I still loved her. I did, but I hated the way she was treating me. She refused to talk about anything important, our marriage, her faithfulness. My anxiety spiraled as I wondered if she'd been with someone else, if she'd crossed lines during her research. I couldn't live like this anymore. Something had to change, whether it was her or me. I thought about leaving, starting over, but I couldn't imagine life without her. That's when I decided I had to find out what was going on. I started thinking about contacting someone at her university, someone who might have some answers. Her behavior was setting off alarm bells. The changes in her appearance, the way she'd recoil from any kind of intimacy. It was like she was a different person, a stranger wearing my wife's skin. She'd lost all interest in me, in my life, in how I was feeling. The connection we'd had, physical and emotional, was gone. I started avoiding her, which just pushed us further apart. To make matters worse, she was always locking her computer with a password. When I confronted her, she brushed it off, said I shouldn't worry about her work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. No matter how many times she reassured me, my distrust grew. She wouldn't tell me anything about her research, and said it would jeopardize everything. This level of secrecy was new, completely foreign to our marriage. I told her I felt shut out, but she dismissed it like it was nothing. I was desperate for a way out of this nightmare. My boss had suggested talking to Savannah's thesis advisor, Professor Caldwell, and I finally made an appointment. In the meantime, I decided to see if I could find anything suspicious in our finances or on her computer. I didn't turn up anything unusual in our bank accounts, but I did reach out to a tech expert friend of mine who could maybe help me access Savannah's computer while she was out. I hated the thought of snooping, but I needed answers, and Savannah wasn't giving me any. My opportunity came when Savannah told me she had a meeting with her thesis committee the following Tuesday. That gave me the time I needed to dig deeper. With my friend's help, I planned to uncover whatever secret Savannah was so determined to keep. Tuesday morning rolled around, and nothing had changed. Savannah was still distant, no affection, just that same guarded behavior. She was still wearing those shapeless, conservative clothes that hid her figure. I decided to hold off on confronting her, at least until I had more information. But I knew I couldn't wait much longer. If she didn't start talking soon, I was prepared to file for divorce. Thank God we didn't have kids. I met Professor Caldwell at his office. He was polite, confirmed that he was Savannah's advisor, and told me she had a research expense account, though he didn't know if she'd submitted anything. His secretary later gave me a detailed account statement. I asked him about the unexpected turn Savannah's research seemed to have taken. He acknowledged there'd been a shift, but said Savannah would have to be the one to tell me about it. He mentioned her research needed some revisions, but her committee was generally supportive of her work. He urged me, as her husband, to sit down with her and really talk about what had happened during her research trip, emphasizing the importance of forgiveness in marriage. His words, meant to be reassuring, only amplified my anxiety and suspicion. I asked about how she'd kept in touch with her committee while she was in Appalachia, and he confirmed she'd been using her audio recording equipment. When I inquired about her living arrangements during the research, he said she would be covering that in her presentation, but he couldn't discuss it without her consent. He did think it was strange that she'd explicitly asked him not to talk to me about it, which just raised more red flags. As I was leaving, his secretary handed me a file with Savannah's financial records from the university. I thanked her and kept it for later. Driving home, my suspicions churned. Professor Caldwell hadn't put my mind at ease at all. If anything, I was even more paranoid than before. I still had no concrete proof of infidelity, but all this secrecy was beyond suspicious. When I got home, I hid the file in my desk. I didn't mention my meeting with Professor Caldwell to Savannah. It was the first time I'd kept something important from her, and it didn't sit right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. We had a brief conversation that evening, but the tension hung in the air like a bad smell. I told Savannah that her behavior was making me think she'd been unfaithful, and that something had to change or our marriage was done. She just winced and gave me this forced smile, promising again to explain everything after her thesis was approved. On the day of her thesis defense, Savannah showed up in the same conservative outfit. I suggested she dress up a little for such a big day, but she brushed me off, saying looks didn't matter in her field. After she left, I called my tech friend. He was ready. He got to the house with his equipment and had Savannah's computer accessed in no time. He copied all her emails, files, even the deleted data, then erased any trace of us being there. He told me to store the backup disks somewhere safe, so I rented a safety deposit box and tucked them away, knowing that whatever was on those disks had the potential to blow our marriage sky high. When Savannah got home that night, she actually seemed happy. She'd grabbed dinner in the city and called, telling me to pick up burgers on my way home. I asked about her thesis critique. It went even better than I expected, she said with a genuine smile. They're going to publish it. I'm almost done, Caleb. No more secrets, no more problems. She was practically giddy, a stark contrast to her usual withdrawn demeanor. See? I told you my outfit didn't matter. My research spoke for itself. I offered congratulations, but when I went to hug and kiss her, she pulled away. I can't kiss you like that anymore, she murmured. Confusion warred with frustration inside me. Your degree is practically in the bag, your research is done. Why can't we focus on ourselves now? She shook her head, stepping back. We can't go back, Caleb. I pressed her, needing answers. Are you saying our marriage is over? Instead of answering, she asked for one more week, just one, to deal with some grant money and graduation fees. I was livid, accusing her of jerking me around. We fought again, and in the end, I reluctantly agreed to wait, but I warned her that if she put me off again, I was calling a divorce lawyer. I went for another long walk that night, anger and fear gnawing at me. It was the worst night of my life. I couldn't sleep. Savannah didn't seem to sleep much either. The next morning, something was different. Her stomach, usually flat, had a slight, rounded curve to it. Horror washed over me as I realized she was pregnant. Given the timeline, it couldn't be mine. She must have been pregnant before she even came home. That explained the secrecy, the distance, everything. Rage, raw and uncontrollable, surged through me. I shook her awake, ignoring her startled cries. You're pregnant, I roared. With another man's baby. I tightened my grip on her arm. No more lies, Savannah. You're telling me everything right now. I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I tried to make coffee, to calm down, but the rage only intensified. I smashed a glass against the wall, the sound echoing my fury. This was a nightmare. When I finally called Savannah back to the table, she came in looking pale and shaken. She was wearing that same shapeless dress. Put on some decent clothes, Savannah, I demanded. I can't, she stammered, her eyes welling up. My old clothes don't fit anymore. Then it hit me. She'd been trying to hide the pregnancy, the evidence of her betrayal, beneath those baggy clothes. I've known since the day I got back. She confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face you. She went on to explain that she thought she was pregnant from an assault that happened during her research. She said the leader of the community, a man named Jedediah, had forced himself on her. She'd felt trapped, terrified. Said there was no one to turn to, that his family controlled everything in that town, even the law. She described how it started with force, but then it became something else. How she'd felt like she had no choice but to submit. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. My anger faltered. If she'd been attacked, that changed everything. I'd always dismissed those kinds of stories, though they didn't happen here. But now I had proof staring me in the face. As I fought to process this new information, a cold fury settled in its place. I would make him pay, but first, I needed the truth. Savannah, I said, my voice softer now, though no less edged with pain. I'm so sorry you were hurt. But that doesn't explain why you wouldn't let me touch you, why you kept seeing him, willingly. It doesn't explain the clothes, the secrecy. There's more to it than that. Tell me everything, Savannah. She wiped her tears, but they just kept coming. I couldn't tell if it was shame or relief that was making her cry. I'm trying, Caleb. She sobbed. This is so hard. I was going to tell you, but not like this. Not all at once. Please, just let me explain it the way I planned. Please. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I said, my voice tight. But it all comes out today, Savannah. No more lies, no more delays. Yes, everything. Today, I promise. She choked out. Savannah. I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Before you start, there are some things you need to know. I've been doing some digging of my own. I talked to your professor. I even got into your computer. This is your last chance to be honest with me. I went into my office and retrieved a tape recorder, setting it up on the table. I took Savannah's phone, turning it off, making sure there would be no distractions. She took a deep breath and began. I listened as she started talking about her childhood. Savannah. I interrupted, my voice sharp with disbelief. Are you telling me that you grew up in one of those polygamous communities? Like the ones you were studying? Yes, Caleb, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the table. My mother, she was the fourth wife. In a family just like the one I was researching. When I was 11, she continued, her voice trembling slightly, she escaped with me. We left everything behind, ran away in the middle of the night. We ended up in Colorado, and built a new life. I haven't talked about any of it, until now. She trailed off, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. She asked for a break, and for the first time since she'd come back from Appalachia, we went for a walk together. She even held my hand. Afterwards, we sat down on the porch with glasses of water and some fruit. The tape recorder whirred silently between us. My childhood, Savannah said, picking up the thread of her story. It's the reason I got into this area of study. I wanted to understand that world, from an adult perspective. This next part, it'll be harder to hear. But I'll be honest, Caleb. I promise. She explained that the family she'd stayed with, the one Jedediah led, was actually connected to her own family from her childhood. They'd been suspicious of her at first, but she'd managed to convince them she might be coming back to that life for good. Jedediah, she said, was a tall, imposing man in his 50s. He ruled his family with an iron fist. One of the first things he'd done was make her surrender her wedding ring. She went along with it, knew she didn't have a choice if she wanted to stay and finish her research. Her voice shook as she described what happened next. He asked what was in my backpack. I told him, clothes, my things, my computer. He took it from me, smashed it with a hoe, then threw it away. He took my purse too, the cash I had in there, $1,000. Said women weren't allowed to have money in his house. Thank God I'd hidden some cash near the bus station, just in case. It was becoming clear that she hadn't been a guest in that community, but a captive. And Jedediah had been her jailer. It became obvious that I needed his approval to do my research. So I agreed to his terms. She paused, her voice softening slightly. That's why I became so withdrawn when I got home. I had to recreate everything from memory, my notes, my observations, even my emotional responses. That was the hardest part, the most crucial for my research. It all caused me so much anxiety. Being there, being back here. But losing the computer, that was just a small part of the stress I was under. I agreed to follow their rules, not cause any trouble. Which, in a way, aligned with my research goals. Her gaze met mine. You're probably wondering why he let me stay, why he'd even want me there. An outsider? It's because, well, Jedediah, he's actually a relative. Distantly, not by blood or anything. He's about 20 years older than me. After my father died, he became the head of the family. She swallowed hard. When I got there, they gave me a bed in the attic. With the other wives. Jedediah slept downstairs, and the children. They slept with us too. I was expected to work alongside the other women, dress like them, obey all their rules. She stopped again, as if gathering her strength. The first wife, she went through my suitcase. Found my birth control pills. Threw them out. Said they were unnatural, an abomination against God's will. They burned my clothes too, the ones I'd brought with me. All I had left were these plain white cotton garments they gave me. I couldn't exactly protest. It was to follow their rules or leave. She looked at me then, a strange mix of defiance and resignation in her eyes. At the time, I didn't think much of losing the pills. Since we weren't together, I figured I'd just start taking them again when I got home. I settled into a routine. Savannah continued, her gaze distant. And gradually, I gained their trust. The wives, it gave me access to information I never could have gotten otherwise. I couldn't keep a diary or anything, so I had to rely on my memory. That's a big part of why I needed so much privacy when I got back. I scribbled a note on my notepad as she spoke, my mind spinning. She went on, her voice dropping to a near whisper. My second week there, Jedediah, he announced he was taking me as his fourth wife. I was stunned. I told him I was already married, but he didn't care. Said God had revealed it to him, that I was meant to be his. She shuddered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. When I tried to refuse, he got rough. Dragged me into his bedroom, threatened me. He forced himself on me, Caleb. After that, I knew I was trapped. She took a shaky breath, her eyes squeezed shut. He treated me like his wife. He was controlling, domineering. And me, I became submissive. It's hard to explain, but over time, I started to accept it. Even enjoy it. I started to lose myself, Caleb, lose the life we had. This new reality, it became my everything. The other wives, they'd been through the same thing. They understood. Her voice was barely audible now. After weeks of being confined to the house, Jedediah finally let me start going out, visiting other families. By then, I had a lot of material for my research. They even had me teaching the community's children. I developed lesson plans that fit their particular beliefs. My role there became essential to my research. I was fully accepted as one of them. Her voice cracked as she went on. Then one night, there was a party, a celebration for Jedediah's daughter. I saw my chance. I grabbed the credit card I'd hidden, left a note, and I just walked. The same route my mother and I had taken all those years ago. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if she were cold. I walked for 8 miles, Caleb. I was exhausted, but I made it to the bus station, got the cash I'd stashed. You know the rest. I came home, and started writing. I shut myself away to focus, to block it all out. The memories, the emotions, everything. Even you. That's why I needed to be alone, Caleb. She said, her voice weary. I had to shut everything out, the emotions, our relationship, everything. My mind had to be clear, free from any distractions. That included intimacy with you. She looked at me, her expression a confusing mix of pleading and defiance. This next part, it's going to be even harder. Do you want to ask questions, or should I just keep going? I gestured for her to continue. What was the point of the questions? Our marriage was already a smoldering ruin. I've had a lot of time to think, Caleb, to reflect on the 2 lives I've lived. They're very different, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. And to be honest with you, I'm drawn to that life, that rural, communal way of being. The idea of multiple wives, it has its appeal, something I explored in my thesis. In fact, I'm writing a novel about my experiences. I've already received a $50,000 advance. She paused, then went on, her voice taking on a distant, analytical tone, as if she were discussing someone else's life. The wives, Caleb, they got along well, even competed with each other to please their husband. What my mother and I fought so hard to escape, it doesn't seem as terrible now, in retrospect. People need to feel like they belong, Caleb, to be happy. I've come to accept their way of life, even if it goes against everything we believe in. So, what? You're okay with assault now? I spat, unable to contain my disgust. That's not just wrong, Savannah, it's evil. She ignored my outburst and kept talking, her voice flat, emotionless. Let me explain why I haven't been intimate with you. I was afraid that being with you would interfere with my memories, the memories of Jedediah. The ones I needed for my research. And then when I got pregnant, well, that just made me lose all desire for sex altogether. Over time, I realized I was torn, Caleb. 2 different worlds, 2 very different men. She stood up, pacing in front of me, her voice rising with each word. Out there, I was someone else. Someone submissive, obedient, and with him, with Jedediah, it was intense. Primal, and in a way, Caleb, it was more fulfilling. More honest. Now that my thesis is done, I need to make a choice. Stay with you, or go back to him. I can't have both. If I go back, I have to be faithful his way. And that means, I can't have been with you. If I stay here, with you, you'll have to accept his child. She stopped pacing, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the wall. I'm still wearing your ring, Caleb. Because Jedediah made me. He said there was no need for a new one, since he already had it. Her gaze snapped back to mine. It started with an attack, yes. But I chose to stay. I chose him. That dynamic, the power, it was intoxicating, Caleb. Exciting. New. So, here I am. You in this life, or him and that one. It's not an easy decision. She stopped again, her chest heaving. I told my committee everything, Caleb. How it started, how I learned to enjoy it. They know about the baby. They don't care. It doesn't affect my thesis. So, ask away, Caleb. I've answered your questions. Just, please, try to be civil. I sat there, stunned, as she laid out her twisted justification for betrayal. It was more than infidelity. She'd embraced a world that was abhorrent to me, chosen a man who represented everything I despised. My mind raced, piecing it all together, and suddenly, it hit me. The computer, the financial records, none of it mattered. I had everything I needed on that tape. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. You made this choice, Savannah, and you didn't think to include me? You trampled our vows, our life together. You took a lover, had his child, and destroyed our marriage. You pushed me out of your life, out of your heart. There's no coming back from that. We're done, Savannah. Our marriage is over. I stood up, towering over her. You have two choices. Try to go back to him, and pray he takes you back. Or raise his child alone, like your mother did. But either way, you're on your own. Don't expect anything from me. No financial support, no emotional support, nothing. You put me through hell, Savannah. You killed whatever we had. I'm seeing a divorce lawyer tomorrow, Savannah. I said, my voice cold, devoid of any remaining warmth. You chose your research, you chose infidelity, over us. This is what you wanted, and now you have to live with the consequences. You used me, Savannah. Used me while you were giving yourself, heart and soul, to another man. Don't expect me to pay alimony, to hand over half of everything I've earned, just so some other man can have you. A harsh laugh escaped my throat, bitter and full of self-loathing. How could you even think that? Savannah's eyes hardened, the facade of submissive victim crumbling. I have my own money, Caleb. My grant money, the advance for my book. I don't need anything from you. That's not the point, Savannah. I shouted, my voice cracking with the effort of holding back the rage that threatened to consume me. You used me, plain and simple. You never loved me. You think my grant paid for everything? I continued, my voice quieter now, dangerously calm. That it covered all the costs of my research? It barely paid for tuition. I paid for the rest, Savannah. Without question, without complaint. Because I loved you. You weren't just unfaithful physically, you were unfaithful with our finances. With our lives. Did you marry me just to make things easier, to get your degree? My voice broke. You broke my heart, Savannah. And you don't even seem to care. You lied to me. All those years, all those promises, lies. I stood up, turning away from her, unable to bear the sight of her anymore. I don't even want to be around you anymore. She flinched, as if I had struck her. Caleb, she whispered, her voice small, pleading. I did love you, all those years. I hoped you would understand, that you would accept me, for all of me. I wanted you to just be faithful. Without making it such a big deal. I whirled around, my voice thick with scorn. You call this betrayal a big deal? You broke my heart, Savannah. You shattered it, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. You don't understand the first thing about love or commitment. You wanted me to, what? To be okay with your infidelity? Is that what you call love? My God, Savannah, you're just like him now. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd confessed everything to those academics, her precious committee, but she couldn't bear to tell her own husband the truth. I saw it then, with painful clarity. I'd always been secondary, a means to an end. Are you going back to him? I asked, my voice hollow. Do you even know what you're walking into? He won't hesitate to hurt you, Savannah. He'll see it as his right. As discipline. You escaped once, but you might not be so lucky this time. You could die there, Savannah. And if you do, they'll cover it up. You're risking your life, and the life of your child. And I won't be a part of it. Not anymore. I didn't know if any of it was true, but I needed to shake her, to break through this delusional fog she'd wrapped herself in. I wasn't thinking about reconciliation, about saving our marriage. All I wanted was to hurt her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. You think you can handle that life, Savannah? You think you're strong enough? You'll find out soon enough. If you value your life, be very careful. I couldn't fathom how someone as intelligent as Savannah could even entertain the thought of returning to that world. Was she delusional? Mentally ill? The thought of her throwing away everything we had, everything she was, for a domineering, abusive tyrant, it was baffling. I got up and paced the room, the weight of it all threatening to crush me. The sun had set on our marriage. This morning, Savannah, I was angry. Now, I'm just empty, defeated, numb. But at least it's over. At least I know the truth. Now, I need to figure out how to live without you. Because the Savannah I loved, she doesn't exist anymore. Not to me. My voice was a monotone, drained of all emotion. I felt old, broken. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted her gone. She sat there, saying nothing, her gaze fixed on the wall. I went for another walk, needing air, needing space to think. I knew this wasn't over, not really. She might have dug her own grave, but the bastard who'd done this to us, to her, he was still out there. Jedediah needed to pay. That night, I slept on the couch, the silence deafening. The next morning, I called my boss and put in for 2 weeks of leave. Savannah had already made coffee. Enjoy it, I said, my voice flat, emotionless. They don't have coffee where you're going. There's a lot they don't have. But I'm sure you'll find a way to get your needs met. We're getting divorced, Savannah. You can keep the book money, but don't expect anything else. This house goes on the market today. I had plans for Jedediah, plans I wouldn't share with her. Start packing your things, Savannah, I said, heading towards the door. I'm moving out this afternoon, to the company apartment. I'll get the rest of my things later. From now on, we communicate through lawyers. I tossed her phone on the table. Don't bother trying to contact me. I packed quickly, methodically, grabbing clothes, toiletries, and the essentials. I took the tape recorder and the tapes, just in case there were any issues with the divorce. I didn't say goodbye. She was just another obstacle to be navigated, another casualty in the wreckage of my life. The next day, I went to the bank, closed our joint accounts, and moved the money into new ones. I canceled our credit cards and applied for new ones in my name only. I met with a divorce lawyer and set the wheels in motion. No contest, no alimony, no shared custody, nothing. My boss was surprisingly understanding. Said he'd do whatever he could to help me through this. I told him I just needed my paychecks deposited into my new account and some time to get back on my feet. If Savannah called, my coworkers could give her my new number. I'd deal with her then. That evening, I drove back to the house. Savannah wasn't there. I gathered the rest of my things, books, files, clothes, tools, my cello, anything that held even a sliver of meaning. I called the realtor to update my contact information. I'm afraid I can't list the property without Ms. Walker's signature, sir, the realtor said. Fine, I said, my voice tight. Let her deal with the mortgage, the yard work, the leaky faucet in the bathroom. It's her problem now. I left a note for Savannah with my new contact information, though I doubted she'd reach out. In the note, I mentioned that I wanted to talk. Not about the divorce. About Jedediah. The more I knew, the better I could plan. Because I was going to make him pay. For her. For us. For every lie, every broken promise, every tear. My mind was made up. Jedediah was going to pay for what he did. For the way he'd poisoned Savannah's mind, destroyed our marriage. I sat down and wrote her a note, pouring my heart out, begging her to meet me, to help me understand what kind of man Jedediah was, his routines, his way of thinking. I needed her to be my unwitting informant. Later that day, I went back to see the divorce lawyer. I brought the tapes, the files from Savannah's computer, and told him everything. I refused counseling, insisted on a clean break, 50-50 split of everything, including the advance for her book. No alimony, no child support. And she was taking her maiden name back. Her kid wouldn't carry my name either. I wouldn't have it, wouldn't have my family name tainted by their deceit. The lawyer drew up the papers. I wrote him a hefty check, my hand barely trembling. I didn't care what it cost. I just wanted it over. I craved freedom, freedom from Savannah, from marriage, from the hate that was slowly eating me alive. That night, Savannah called. Said she wanted to talk. We agreed to meet for lunch the next day, in the town where we first met, back when things were simpler, before the lies, before Jedediah. I slept soundly that night, for the first time in months, my mind clear, my purpose solidified. Savannah was the past, Jedediah was the present, and vengeance was my future. Success was all that mattered. I met Savannah at a diner in our old college town. She looked different, healthier. She was wearing a stylish maternity dress, a touch of makeup highlighting her features. For a moment, a pang of longing shot through me, a wish that the child was mine. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, a fading reminder of Jedediah's brutality. The waitress led us to a quiet booth in the back. I kept my tone neutral, careful not to betray the storm raging inside me. I complimented her appearance, her return to something resembling normalcy, though it no longer mattered to me. Caleb. She started, her voice small, hesitant. I wanted to apologize for the things I said the other day. It wasn't what you said, Savannah. I replied, meeting her gaze directly. It was what you did. Our divorce is happening. You'll have the papers soon. You're free to do whatever you want after that. Go back to him. Be a single mother, it's your choice. But it also frees me. I have no obligation to you, or to his child. What you did, Savannah. I can't forgive that. I'm trying not to hate you, I really am. You were a prisoner there, I get that. But, you didn't have to stay. You could have fought back. What happened to you, it wasn't right. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around. I took a deep breath, pushing down the memories that threatened to overwhelm me. Look, I'm not here to rehash the past. I want to understand your life there. Tell me about your routine, Jedediah's work, the name of the community, where it is. Just the facts, Savannah. We ate in silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. When she was finished, she told me about her plans to return to Jedediah. My warnings about his violence had clearly rattled her, but she was determined to go back, to negotiate the terms of her return. And she was still agonizing over us, her divided heart, as she called it. Her words ignited a spark of anger in the pit of my stomach. Savannah. I interrupted, my voice tight with suppressed fury. Our marriage is over. You made your choice, and you ripped my heart out in the process. You think about another man, you carry his child, while you're married to me, and you wonder if our marriage is salvageable? Infidelity isn't just about sex, Savannah. Someday, maybe you'll understand the depth of your betrayal. You stood in front of our families, in front of God, and swore to be faithful. And you threw it all away. For what? A degree? Some twisted fantasy? I steered the conversation back to Jedediah, asking about their daily life in that twisted community. She answered my questions, telling me everything I wanted to know, seemingly oblivious to my real purpose. She described Jedediah, deeply religious, ruled by superstition, a control freak who revealed his power over his family. He was a pillar of that community, respected by the men, feared by the women. And he demanded obedience, especially from his wives. She told me about his insatiable appetite, how he'd sleep with 2, sometimes 3 of his wives in a single night. And how Savannah had enjoyed trying to keep up with him. It was a thinly veiled attempt to wound me, to make me see what I'd lost. It worked, but I kept my face impassive, filed it away for later. I left the diner with a renewed sense of purpose. Jedediah was going to regret ever laying a hand on my wife. I stopped by Savannah's mother's house on my way out of town. She was home from her teaching job. We sat at her kitchen table, and I told her about the baby. She was thrilled at first, but her joy evaporated as I recounted the events of the past few months. Savannah's infidelity, Jedediah's manipulation. She had no idea. To her, their escape from that life had been a harrowing experience, like something out of a history book. The thought of her only child, her Savannah, being drawn back into that world, it broke her. We sat there, 2 souls united in grief, and we cried. For Savannah, for the life we thought she had, for the future that would never be. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, we held each other. Her tears soaked my shirt, and mine dampened her hair. We didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. We understood each other's pain. After what felt like an eternity, we finally pulled away, emotionally drained but strangely comforted by the other's presence. She insisted I stay the night, and I gratefully accepted. The next morning, after a breakfast of strong coffee and real conversation, I continued on my way to my parents' house. I promised Savannah's mom I'd stay in touch. She was a good woman, strong and kind, and I saw flashes of the woman Savannah had once been in her eyes. As I drove, my anger at Jedediah grew. He had taken everything from me. Everything. My parents weren't home when I arrived. I tried my dad's cell, and he picked up on the second ring. He and Mom were at my brother's place, a few hours away. I decided to surprise them. Maybe spending time with family, being surrounded by people who loved me unconditionally, would help me navigate this new, uncertain chapter of my life. A life without Savannah. I stopped at a motel just outside of town. My brother had gotten back from Afghanistan a few months ago. He'd been an infantry company commander over there, seen some heavy stuff. I wasn't sure how he'd react to all of this, but I needed my family. After the initial greetings and hugs, I pulled everyone into the living room. It was time for a difficult conversation. I ordered pizzas, salads, and drinks, wanting everyone to be comfortable as possible given the circumstances. When the food arrived, I took a deep breath and told them everything. Mom broke down almost immediately. Dad kept asking if there was any chance of reconciliation. I started at the beginning, with Savannah's research, my work trip, the changes I'd noticed in her when she came back. The pizza arrived mid-story, a welcome but surreal interruption. Then came the hardest part, telling them about the baby, Jedediah, the tangled mess our lives had become. The pain was a living thing inside me, twisting, churning, fueled by a growing sense of rage. Mom sobbed, clinging to Dad. He was trying to be strong, but I could see the tremor in his hands, the tears he was fighting back. My brother, ever the soldier, sat silently throughout my entire story, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. When I was finished, he stood up and paced the room, lost in thought. We were all exhausted, emotionally wrung out. Finally, he stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on me. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, serious. "We need to talk. Just you and me. Let's take a walk." He pulled me up from the couch, and we excused ourselves. On the way out the door, he called back to Mom and Dad. "We'll be back in an hour or so." We drove to my motel in silence. Once we were inside, he poured us each a stiff drink, then turned to me, his expression grim. "You're in a war, little brother," he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he must have used with his men. And you're not prepared to fight it. But I'm going to tell you how. He took a swig of his drink, his gaze never leaving mine. There are rules to this fight, Caleb. If you want to win, you have to play by the rules. You might have lost Savannah, but you don't have to lose everything. Jedediah is the enemy now. And you need to take him down. But you can't do it blindly. You can't afford to make mistakes, to cause collateral damage. I don't need to know your plan, Caleb, not now. He continued, his voice low, steady. But when you win, and you will win, you tell me everything. First, you know your enemy. His strengths, his weaknesses. Then you match your strengths to his weaknesses. Don't let him use his strengths against you, Caleb. And don't let him exploit your weaknesses. You choose the time. You choose the place. Surprise is everything. This has to be a surgical strike, minimal collateral damage. You don't want innocent people getting hurt. Plan carefully. Keep it secret. And don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. It has to be quick, clean, and efficient. Remember, it always takes more than you think. Good luck, little brother. And be careful. We finished our drinks in silence, the unspoken weight of his words settling between us. I knew he was right. This wasn't just about anger, about revenge. This was about strategy, about survival. I was playing a dangerous game now, and the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. We headed back to my brother's place. The next morning, we had breakfast with Mom and Dad, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Then they hit the road, headed back home. I followed close behind. There was something I needed to collect from my parents' attic, something I'd stashed away years ago, something even they didn't know about. I spent a few days with my folks. Mom gradually came out of her shell, and Dad and I talked about everything but the war brewing inside me. We reminisced, laughed, just enjoyed being a family. But the clock was ticking. I had a plan to make, and time was running out. While they were out shopping one afternoon, I went up to the attic, found what I was looking for, and carefully loaded it into my SUV. The next day, I said my goodbyes and hit the road, headed back to my empty apartment. My boss had been pushing for me to join him on another expedition, and with Savannah out of the picture, it was easier to agree. I told my parents I'd be gone for a couple of months, working off the coast of Africa. That part was true, at least. But first, I had a detour to make. I had about 3 months before I had to leave for Africa, 3 months to take care of Jedediah. I put the weapon, still in its case, in a storage unit on the outskirts of town. I knew they could track my movements, so I rented a moving van and picked up a few pieces of furniture from our old place. Unremarkable stuff that wouldn't raise any red flags. Back at my apartment, I spread out maps on the floor, satellite images of the area around Jedediah's town. I studied them intently, memorizing every detail, roads, fields, structures. I wanted him to suffer. A quick death wasn't enough. I wanted him humiliated, broken. But as I planned, I realized that simply eliminating him wouldn't be enough. He needed to know. He needed to know it was me, Savannah's husband, who'd brought him down. But I couldn't afford to leave any evidence. It had to be perfect. Savannah wasn't getting off scot-free either. She might be carrying his child, but she'd made her choice. And she would suffer the consequences. My boss had given me the name of a lawyer, a real shark, and I contacted him, told him I wanted to sue the university. I wanted them to regret ever letting her near that community, near Jedediah. I didn't care about the legal ramifications. I just wanted to make them hurt. The lawyer drafted a scathing letter, threatening a $20 million lawsuit for negligence, for emotional distress, for everything under the sun. He sent it to the university president, the board of trustees, anyone who might have the power to make their lives a living hell. The response was almost immediate. Savannah's degree hadn't been officially conferred yet, and the board was still reviewing her thesis. My lawyer demanded they not only reject her research but publicly denounce her work, revoke her thesis with no possibility of appeal. Within 2 weeks, the board caved. They issued a formal resolution, ordering the university president to investigate the sociology department, reprimand everyone involved in approving Savannah's research, and formally deny her degree. They even contacted her publisher, demanding they remove any mention of the university from her book. Her grant money? Frozen. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of grim satisfaction washing over me. This was just the beginning. Jedediah was next. Weeks passed. The university couldn't reach Savannah to inform her about their decision. They contacted my lawyer, who gave them her divorce lawyer's contact info, along with her mother's address and Jedediah's. Savannah wasn't at our old house. I wondered where she was. Despite everything, I couldn't help but worry about her, about the baby she carried. I hated her for what she'd done, but I still cared. I had another plan brewing, one that would send a message straight to Jedediah. A message from God. I spent hours crafting a document, mimicking the style of the Declaration of Independence, laced with scripture verses that would strike fear into his superstitious heart. I revised it over and over, then printed it on thick, expensive linen paper, placed it in a beautiful leather folder. No fingerprints, no trace of me. It was perfect. Jedediah, with his rigid beliefs, his faith in divine revelations, would see this document for what it was. A message from a higher power. I chuckled to myself, picturing his reaction. My brother's words echoed in my mind. Use your strengths against his weaknesses. I shifted my focus, preparing for my two upcoming journeys. One to confront Jedediah, the other to the vast, unforgiving ocean off the coast of Africa. I wouldn't be coming back after the first trip. I would be a phantom, an avenging angel, appearing from nowhere, delivering justice, then vanishing without a trace. It was a thrilling prospect, but one wrong move could ruin everything. This had to be executed flawlessly. I spent every free moment studying, practicing, gathering information. Thank God for the internet. No need to risk leaving a trail at a library. I researched everything I could about Jedediah, about his community, about that isolated corner of Appalachia where he held court. I knew the layout of his farm, his crops, his daily routine, even his favorite spot to rest in the shade of a lone oak tree on the edge of his wheat field. I had my battlefield picked out. And it was mine. Weeks of meticulous planning went into this. I immersed myself in human anatomy, focusing on the male reproductive system. My goal was simple: to remove one of Jedediah's testicles. I wanted to leave him with the drive, the urge, but without the ability to satisfy it. He took my wife, so I would take away his manhood. It felt right, like a balancing of the scales, but I knew the risks. I couldn't afford to get caught. This had to be clean. I fine-tuned every detail, bought supplies from different stores, always paying in cash. I even ordered a fake beard and theatrical makeup online, along with a pair of oversized work boots from a thrift store. I was constructing a new identity, one that would disappear as quickly as it appeared. One morning, my lawyer called. Savannah had signed the divorce papers. No contest. I didn't even have to appear in court. The 60-day waiting period had begun. He'd informed Savannah's lawyer about the university's decision, and apparently, she'd lost it. She'd lost everything: her degree, her reputation, her future. I felt a twinge of guilt, knowing her mother was caught in the crossfire, but Savannah had made her bed. Our house sold quickly. We split the proceeds down the middle. She didn't want to stay there, and I didn't care where she went. I had my own path to forge, my own wounds to heal. Strangely, I'd lost all desire for sex. My energy was consumed by the plan, by the need to make Jedediah pay. I figured my libido would return eventually. Savannah had been my only partner. I didn't want anyone else, not even her, not anymore. I kept in touch with my boss, helped with some preliminary planning for the Africa trip. It would be the perfect alibi, the perfect cover. My tech-savvy friend, the one who'd helped me with Savannah's computer, came through again, hooking me up with fake passports, driver's licenses, everything I needed to vanish. He was even going to cover for me on the first leg of the Africa trip, creating a seamless trail while I took care of Jedediah. We coordinated our flights, our movements, leaving nothing to chance. I packed my supplies, rented another storage unit for the furniture, and prepped the rental car I'd be using. Gloves, no fingerprints. Then, I was ready. I put on my disguise, the beard, the makeup, the work clothes, and drove to Jedediah's town. I cruised through the main street, making sure I was seen, but I didn't engage with anyone. I thought I saw Savannah, but I couldn't be sure. I hoped so. I hoped she'd bear witness to the justice I was about to deliver. Then I left, without a word, ready for the final act. That night, I drove to Jedediah's farm, parked a safe distance away, and hiked to the spot I'd chosen. I settled in about 20 yards from the lone oak where he always took his afternoon break, concealed beneath a camouflage net. I checked my equipment one last time, making sure everything was in place. The weapon, a tranquilizer gun designed for large African game, was loaded with enough to knock out a 300-pound animal. Jedediah was a big man, probably close to 280. I slipped into the white robe I'd brought, the one I'd camouflaged to blend in with the terrain. Tucked inside the robe, hidden from view, was the leather folder containing my message from God. I was ready. The afternoon sun beat down on me. I drank water, trying to stay hydrated, watching the field, waiting for my target to appear. Just before noon, Jedediah emerged from the farmhouse, heading towards the wheat field. He worked for a couple of hours, then, as I'd anticipated, headed for the shade of the oak tree. Now or never. I raised the tranquilizer gun, took aim at his backside, and fired. The dart hit its mark. He swatted at it, confused, but it was too late. The drug was fast-acting. I threw off the camouflage net, stripped off my disguise, and emerged from my hiding place. I wanted him to see me, to see the face of the man he'd wronged. I had maybe 20 seconds before he'd be completely unconscious. Jedediah. I shouted, my voice echoing across the field. God has heard the cries of Caleb Walker, Savannah's true husband. You have sinned, and I am the instrument of his justice. Jedediah tried to stand, his eyes widening with fear, but his legs buckled beneath him. He tried to speak, but no words came out. I made sure he saw my face, saw the rage burning in my eyes, before the darkness swallowed him. No one saw, no one heard. I'm not a violent man, not by nature. But in that moment, I felt no hesitation, no remorse. Jedediah was helpless now, at my mercy. I worked quickly, efficiently. I pulled down his overalls and underwear, exposing him. After tying a tourniquet around the base, I used a scalpel to remove most of his right testicle, leaving a small stump. I cauterized the wound, then tied off the remaining testicle, securing it with a length of cotton string. I took the severed testicle, placed it around his neck like a grotesque trophy, and deposited the other one in a bag filled with a preservative solution. There was minimal blood, which surprised me. I was satisfied with my work. Jedediah would live, but his days of wielding power over women were over. I placed the leather folder containing my message from God between his legs, the severed testicle resting on top of it. A gruesome tableau. Then, I gathered my things and disappeared. I erased my tracks, making it look like someone else had been there. I drove to a remote location and meticulously disposed of all the evidence, the clothes, the beard, the makeup, the tranquilizer gun, the medical supplies. Everything was burned, reduced to ash. I switched out the tires on the rental car and returned it to the airport, paying in cash, using a fake name. Then, I boarded a flight to South Africa, my fake passport smooth and convincing in my hands. Tucked away in my carry-on bag, a grim souvenir of my victory, Jedediah's severed testicle, preserved in a jar. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me as the plane soared across the ocean. My mission was accomplished. Justice had been served. My friend met me at the airport in Johannesburg. We exchanged brief pleasantries, then went our separate ways. He continued on to the research vessel, maintaining my alibi, while I disappeared into the vastness of Africa. I heard through the grapevine that Savannah had returned to Appalachia, but it hadn't gone well. Jedediah, enraged and humiliated by his emasculation, had become even more violent. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through Caleb Walker's intense story of love, betrayal, and revenge. As we've seen, the unraveling of Caleb and Savannah's marriage led to choices that forever changed their lives, revealing the dark complexities of human nature. Caleb's pursuit of justice took him to unimaginable lengths, showing how far a person can go when driven by pain and betrayal. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one, and hit the bell icon to stay notified whenever we upload new content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.